Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this important hearing. And I want to thank the witnesses as well. And in listening to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, one can't help but get poetic, primarily because we continue to see this consistent trend where the mantra seems to be vote no and take the dough. And at the hearing, put on a show. But when you go to the floor, make sure you're a no. Now, I'm sure you can appreciate the cynicism with that, but the problems that we're dealing with are enormous. In my district, the I-84-91 corridor is the #1 chokehold in the state of Connecticut, #2 in New England, #11 overall in the nation. And when you throw in the levees along the Connecticut River that protect the communities of Hartford and East Hartford, who are experiencing the same kind of sandpiping issues that existed in New Orleans in the 9th Ward, this rises to a level of urgency and why we need this legislation and why we need comprehensive legislation. That and to the two questions that I'd like to ask, I think the Biden administration had this section of Connecticut in mind because it also, aside from cutting off communities from the river, it has also achieved racial isolation, something this committee is focused on, and what it's done to neighborhoods by totally uprooting them and also isolating neighborhoods in North Hartford and what is commonly referred to as the 06120, the poorest zip code in Connecticut, has been cut off by 8 lanes of highways, 91 blocking it from access to the river and 84 blocking it to access of the rest of the community. I commend the Biden administration for this, and my question to Rachel Urbanks is that according to the Army Corps of Engineers, the failure of the Hartford and East Hartford levees could result in over $3 billion in damages, and largely because of Congress's inaction, that we can no longer afford to wait. What do you make of the liabilities and outdated infrastructure, not only in my district, but across the nation? What's your sense of that?
Thank you, Representative Larson, for the question. And, I think I agree with you that we certainly are in an infrastructure deficit crisis. The American Society of Civil Engineers has estimated our deficit to be somewhere as a country in the $2 trillion range. And when we think about, how can we address that? How can we address the critical issues that you're speaking of that factor in, those real stories that factor into that $2 trillion deficit? That's why we're here talking about, having those tools available for us to address them. In addition to the funding, which is a critical part of this package, having some financing tools as well for states and local governments to be able to address those critical issues that you're speaking of.
Thank you. Can I ask Dr. Shayad? Intermodal transportation is so vitally and critically important, but along with making sure that whether it's rail, whether it's highway, whether it's bike paths, walkways, airports, et cetera, that they're interconnected, what about housing? And going back to the example of being isolated by the very infrastructure system that has been put forward. What do we need? What kind of investment do we need to solve that problem? And doesn't that beg and call out for what Mr. Blumenauer was calling for and what you were suggesting before in terms of housing?
Thank you, Representative Larson. Yes, absolutely. Housing is the critical element in all of this because ultimately, this is about place and it's about places and where people reside, where they're able to live, whether they're going to be in harm's way, whether they're going to have access, to services, to jobs, to other amenities. All of that is critically involved in the way that we solve this issue. we approach this from the position that, housing policy is climate policy, and that, we cannot solve the climate crisis without addressing our housing infrastructure, making sure that it is both affordable, but also safe, safe from rising sea levels, safe from extreme weather, and provide some stability to families, but also, making sure that for our working people who have to meet the challenge of this transition with us and for us, that housing provides them the sense of stability and the sense of comfort to be able to face those challenges and to be able to make the transition that's going to be necessary.
Thank the gentleman. Let me
Thank you, sir.
recognize the
With that, I
gentleman
yield
from
back.
New York, Mr. Reed, to inquire.